Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Well, today we're going to go ahead and continue with part 2 of the video on figure painting. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll start up with where I left off with the Fireman, and we'll complete the painting job on him, do some weathering, and get him ready to go in the cab of a locomotive. And I'll also have a feedback segment when we get started. So let's go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead and begin with another feedback sequence for you. And this time it's going to be something that came up in the last video concerning figure painting. And one of the, at least one person, I think maybe two, mentioned wet palettes. And several people responded well with, what is a wet palette? And it's something I had to go myself and look up to find an answer. A wet palette is basically, in most cases, a rectangular plastic box that has a number of depressions in it where you can put small amounts of paint, and it's typically used for figure painting and that kind of thing. And then it has several areas on it, 2 or 3 areas, for mixing these paints together to get various shades to use on your models. The neat thing about the wet palettes are that they have an airtight lid that closes on the box, and that will keep your paints from drying out from one day to the next. So you can use the same paints in multiple paint sessions without having to replenish them or worrying about them drying out. And some people told me they put theirs in the refrigerator overnight. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's what it is. So let's take a look. I went ahead and went online to Amazon, and I'll show you a couple examples of those, and then we'll move on to the actual figure painting. But before we get on to that, I want to remind you, hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Okay, here we are on Amazon.com, and I just searched for wet palette. This particular one caught my attention. It's got 4.5 stars, so it's a pretty good rating. And it's the Falling in Art Store is the source, so you can search under that or just scan through. What I liked about this is they have different versions of this available. You can get a 16 well version, 18, 23, and 24 paint wells. So you can see, if we look at these, you can see the individual depressions, or what they call wells, for the various paints. And then here you've got 2 mixing areas, and you can actually use this lid for the mixing area as well. And you can see this all goes inside of this box here, it appears, and that gives you an airtight seal. And each of these is just a little different. If you only, if you don't want to use 24 paint wells, which I never would, I rarely use more than 3 or 4 paints at a time. But the 16 well looks like a good option, and it closes up, gives you an airtight seal there, plus a lot of different paints. And like I said, the 18, the 23, and the 24. So you got your options of having a, an oval shape, more or less, or the rectangular ones. So take your pick, and if this suits your fancy, it looks like a reasonable option if you are going to be doing a lot of figure painting. So take a look at these. They're a very good option for people who are professional painters, or just who do a lot of wargaming, or if you're going to be doing peopling of your entire layout all at one time and doing some painting, this is probably the way to go with it, because you'll save a lot more time by not having to get your paints out time after time after time. And I assume that any mixes that you create in these mixing wells are going to be around later on and are not going to dry up either. Well, now that you know what a wet palette is, I'm sure you're all going to rush out and purchase one just to have it on hand when you get to doing your own little figures. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off with painting this little fireman that I've been working on. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give him a light gray shirt because it's going to be a little dirty. a little weathered. And it's going to come out looking white in comparison anyway. Go back to my 20-0 brush. And a little touch of the light gray. Okay, then we're going to do this right in here. And we'll bring it right up to his scarf here, because he has some sort of a scarf on. Okay, so there. I've got his shirt done now. And as soon as that dries, I'm going to come back and paint the scarf with a pincy maroon color. Okay. So I'm going to have to set him aside and let him dry. So we've got his flesh, we've got his hat, we've got his coat, we've got his overalls. And we've got his shirt. We haven't done the shovel or his shoes. I'm going to take just a little bit of the flesh and hit him in a couple of places where it's kind of thin. It's going to take a couple of applications to cover where that blue overlapped onto the flesh. So I'll do several applications of the light flesh color on his hands in order to cover up any areas where the blue lapped over onto it. So it's sort of an iterative process in that respect. You kind of go back and forth. But let me get out the, oh yes, this is my pincy maroon. So we're going to give him a maroon scarf. It looks like a deep brown, but it's a maroon color. And for that, I'm going to use my very small brush. Now, I know some professional model painters, they'll take, 2 or 3 or 4 of these individual bristles and glue them to a toothpick, and that will be their what they would use for getting in and doing something like a scarf or a necktie or a mustache, applying one individual hair at a time. Basically, it looks like he's got a scarf right here that comes up and goes around behind his collar. We'll see how much of that you can gets in focus. I'm going to have to work it a little bit more, and also there'll be some more flesh color that's going to need to be applied over that. But you're getting an idea of where we're going with him. So he's got the gray shirt, the blue overalls, the dark blue jacket, and his dark blue cap there, or black cap. So let me go ahead and work around here on the back and pick out more of his scarf back here. I think in hindsight, I probably should have done this scarf first, because I'm getting a lot of overlap of the maroon back onto the flesh and onto the jacket. So some of these you learn from your I don't call it a mistake, but the process as you go through here. I'll cover the rest of that when I come back with flesh after this dries. Okay, let's go ahead and do his shovel and get him pretty well finished up to the point where it's just a matter of touching things up. Let's use some roof brown for the handle. Assume it's a brown handle. Could be black. So what I have is a Pilot silver marker pen, and you can get these sometimes at places like Michael's or other craft stores. I think I ordered several of these online from Amazon. The Amazon stops at my house almost once a day, I tell you. At any rate, got our shovel here, and I'm just going to, here we go. Give it a good metallic silver. And once it dries, I'll give it a touch here and there with some brown and a bit of black to get rusty colors. Okay, so that gets the shiny metal of the shovel if it was brand new. So I'll let that dry, and then we can go ahead and give it a little bit, a touch or two of roof brown for rust, and touches of black here and there as well. Assuming my edges of my shovel are going to be rusty from banging against the firebox door, that kind of thing. So you can see how he's coming along. As you can see, I've gone ahead and done his shoes here. I've painted them black. I've added a little bit of detailing to the shovel by using a black wash on it. And another thing, I went ahead, I noticed in looking at his hand here, his left hand, under close magnification, that in actuality he has his hand stuffed in his pocket. So I went back and just covered that with some of the dark blue paint. So we've got that covered up. Everything else is pretty well ready to be finished. One thing about these figures in scale, HO, scale, the smaller scales, is even though he uses a great 3D scanning technique, and it does capture the posture, the very realistic posture of an individual, and it keeps it true to scale, and we get all of the wrinkles and creases in the clothing, all of those kind of things. You don't get a lot of detail at that scale in the face. So you get the nose and major aspects of the face. However, you won't get a mouth, you won't get individual eyes and that kind of thing. So you basically have to come up with a way of suggesting that those are there. And the way that I do that is by using an India ink wash. And the India ink wash that I use, I make up myself, and it basically consists of a half a teaspoon of India ink dissolved in a quart of isopropyl alcohol. And I use isopropyl alcohol because it dries faster. The original formula that Dave Frary recommended was a half a teaspoon of India ink and 1 quart of water with 4 drops of detergent in it. So you can try that. I like India ink. I like the isopropyl alcohol method because it dries so much faster than water will. So we'll go ahead and flow on some of the India ink wash onto our figure, and that's going to get down into the creases, the wrinkles, and also any depressions here on the face, and at least give you the impression that you will have of eyes and mouth and those kind of things. It creates shadows, basically, in those areas because the pigment in the India ink will settle down in there. And that's the difference between true India ink and the newer versions, because true India ink contains lamp black, which is a very, very, very fine form of carbon, and it's dissolved in either water or alcohol. I'm not sure what they use for the carrier now, but it gives you and it sticks very well to anything that it dries on. So you can use that India ink wash, and those particles of carbon, very fine particles, are going to just settle everywhere that there is any kind of depression. And it's going to give you pick out those shadows. And then once that dries, we're going to go ahead and do some dry brushing to bring out some of the highlights. Now, one thing I will tell you about the India ink is that the pigment does tend to settle out as it sits in the bottle. And I make it up, a pint or so at a time. And with that, and I've had some of these last for years because it goes a long, long way. But you have two options. If you really want to apply a thick, heavy weathering to something, then shake up the bottle before you use the India ink wash. Otherwise, just let it sit, and the largest part of the particles are going to settle out to the bottom, and then you'll just get a thin layer of wash dissolved still in the isopropyl alcohol. So you can control that a lot better. So let's take a look at that. I've just dipped my brush into it. I'm going to apply a little bit here to the face, and you can see how it's flowing in here and just going all over the place. And it looks like it's going to be a very heavy coat. But I'll tell you, once this dries, it's going to be much, much lighter, as you'll see here in a second. And I'm going to do the back of the shovel, his hands, everything on him. I'm just going to give him a coating of that black wash. And I think it's important to do that for these figures because they're in the cab of the locomotive. And depending on the locomotive type, most of the ones in the UK did not have powered stokers or automatic stokers that move the coal from the tender into the firebox automatically or mechanically. They actually had to do the shoveling themselves. So they ended up covered with a lot of coal dust, a lot of soot and the like from the locomotive exhaust. So you really are going to want to make sure that they have at least a suggestion that they've been working in the cab of a locomotive. And I think if you look here right now, you can already see that we've got some details popping out on the face as a result of adding the black wash. Okay, so I'm going to let him dry. Now, if you don't want to make your own washes, Vallejo makes washes. This is a gray wash, which is a very light wash, and it's acrylic, so you could use that as well. I just like my wash a lot better. I've been using it long enough, I feel I can control it. So for this, I'm going to use this 1O brush, okay, and just dab it into a little bit of the gray paint, the Southern Pacific letter gray paint that I've been using. And then I'm just going to wipe that off on this paper towel here. So we get it down to where there's practically no color left in the brush. And then let's flip it over here and we'll do the back of his coat first. And I'm just going to run it across the surface to pick out those creases and details in the back of his coat and his pant legs. So you can see I've gotten a bit on the back of his coat. Now, I can go back and dry brush that, or I can hit that with some India ink wash and knock that down a bit. So you can see I can take some of that off. It's mainly the isopropyl removing some of that wash. Okay, but it does help to highlight the wrinkles in the coat and all of those type of features that normally you're not going to see because it is such a dark garment and such a dark color. And the same thing for the pants. It'll bring those out as well. Now, we still haven't finished completely because after this, what I will do is spray this guy using my airbrush or using a rattle can with a dull lacquer. You might use Tester's Dull Coat that comes in a rattle can, or you could use some of the off-the-shelf matte finishes. So what I will use is this Krylon matte finish number 1311. And you can pick up that, you can pick this up at craft stores, various places like that sell Krylon products sometimes. But that allows you to just do a quick spray finish that will take the shine off of your figures. Okay, so here is the finished figure after I went outside and gave him a couple of shots with the Krylon matte finish. And once that has dried completely, I'll go out and do it again. And I might even hit him with a shot or two of the Dull Coat because he still is just a little bit on the shiny side for what I like. But at least we've got him weathered and we've got him completed. And I hope you can see how I've treated the shovel. Basically, the end of it here, the working end, is kind of grubby looking. And like I said, for that, I just use some black, weathered black, and a little bit of roof brown, so that it's a combination of just grunge and grime and a bit of rust on there as well. And here's my growing collection of painted figures ready to go on the module. So we've got these two guys are going to be workers in the coal yard. I think this guy is the owner, and this is one of his helpers. And this guy here is the station master. And the one in the background, patting the other guy on the head, I think is he's an engineer. So I've got places for all of these guys, and you can see I've highlighted using dry brushing to bring out some of the details of his coat here, and also done some into ink washes on these guys. Since they're working in the coal yard, they're going to be getting a lot of coal dust on them, so they needed to look kind of grubby looking. So that's about it for figure painting. Have a great time doing your own, and take a look, as I said, at that Model U website. I got the address wrong. The actual name is modelu3d.co.uk. So take a look at that and see what you think of the figures. At the very least, it'll give you a feeling for the type of quality that you can get from the 3D scanning technique. And when I first met Alan Butler and was corresponding with him back in 2019, he was planning a trip to the United States in 2020 to scan a lot of people here and develop a range of figures for U.S. Model railroaders. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way of that. But hopefully now that COVID is starting to decline, it looks like, he might be able to get over here in 2022 or 2023. But I'd love to see him do a range of engineers and firemen and other people like that for the U.S. model railroading scene. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. So come on back on Friday for another video. And this time I think I'm going to go back and take a look at a couple of topics related to DCC that I haven't covered in the past, but that a couple of people have asked me about recently. So come on back for another video from the DCC guy. Bye now.